I think why people should be interested in me as an author and my expertise on Americans is because I've lived in the UK for 31 years. And over the course of that time, I've been really lucky to work with companies all over the world interpreting how they grow in America. And so having worked across pretty much every industry sector there is, I've been really lucky to get that exposure to help understand what makes the US culture different from everybody else. And I think on the back of 30 or so years of these conversations, I've been able to finally distill it into what it's like to work with Americans. What prompted Lanie Denslow, my co-author, and I to write this book is the fact that originally, over the last, 20, 30 years I've been in this country, in the UK, in London, I, and certainly Lanie, have repeatedly been asked, how do you help us grow in America? And what is it like to work with Americans? How do we build a rapport? How do we influence them? How do we communicate with them, negotiate? So we thought, well, let's actually package this knowledge, and rather than have to give the same answers all the time, let's put it in writing. So we ended up writing this book, but actually the original idea we had was, why don't we sell a book to Americans to help Americans understand the rest of the world? And we went to a couple of leading publishers in the US, and interestingly, both of them said, we're not really convinced there's a book that would get wide appeal and sales for the Americans to understand everyone else. So we thought, well, that's pretty strange. And on thinking about it, obviously the rest of the world is a bigger market. There's more people in the rest of the world rather than just the US. So we came up with this idea of working with Americans to try to help all of the other companies everywhere else figure this out, because it isn't as straightforward as you might think, and the culture is markedly different from European cultures, African cultures, Middle East, Asia. So that was the motivation, was to try to help package it and help companies make more money, and actually, more importantly, have better relationships, because if you don't have good relationships, it's extremely stressful. My experience as a businesswoman working internationally, the international client work that I do is really what made me realize that people have great intentions, but sometimes the bridges across cultures in doing business deals, they don't quite match up, they don't quite connect. And I found many conversations and client relationships would have been even better if we both had better knowledge about each other's culture. So I think I've always been an internationalist. I've always been interested in this field of helping companies grow across geographies, about helping people bridge understanding. So I was raised in Munich when I was a child for 4 years, between the ages of 8 and 12. And I think being a fish out of water and realizing that the waters of the United States and the waters of Germany were really different, even at that young age, sparked an interest in me in international things, because I just thought, what a wonderful chance it is to bring people together across, languages, histories, currencies, economic systems, but also humanity. So on one hand, I think being exposed to these international clients and international work, I learn a lot every day. I think the real reward for me is being able to forge connections that are meaningful, because you understand the other person. The empathy can cross cultures, but it's even a better relationship if you understand all the other layers of culture, about how people think, about their religions, about more than just business. You have to look deeper than that, and that's really, really rewarding. I think what a reader would gain from reading Working with Americans is a lot of insight about the history of the country and how the thread of that history is still alive and well today in how Americans do business and how you can trace directly some of the early parts of our evolution as a country back to the 1500s to the beliefs we have today. I think that's one thing. I think another thing they'll learn is the rules of the game. So it might be obvious, and people may assume that, how you do business and the rules of business in the UK or South Africa or Japan are all consistent, but they're really not. And how we play the game of business in America is very different to most other parts of the world. So I think a reader would certainly get that. And I think the third thing a reader would get would be how to communicate with us, how to influence Americans, because we're a very low context business culture. What we say is what we mean. And in a lot of other business cultures, the language and the nuances are very meaningful. Whereas in America, we're in a hurry, so we say what we mean. There's no hidden agendas and hidden symbolism. So I think ultimately, if you put all those things together, what a reader would leave with is some confidence in knowing a lot more about how to win in the world of American business. But I think the other thing they'd gain is reflections on the relationships that they either have today with Americans or that they want to have with American counterparts, and how those could be even stronger and even better. So I think there's a lot to gain from the insights that we're providing. I think what's most important when working with Americans is recognizing that they're always open to new ideas, and that at our heart, I would say, the national religion is Darwinism. So we're always looking for an edge and a way to outperform against our competition. So I think one of the things that any company that wants to win with Americans needs to do is tell us how your service or your product is better or different than what's already in the US marketplace. And that will absolutely grab us, because we're looking, well, I guess we think that new DNA is always a good thing. If you're not evolving, you're with the dinosaurs, and you're gonna be, history. So companies need to really amplify what it is that's better and what it is that's an innovation versus what American companies or other global companies might already have on the market. Because we always want to, we're competitive in business, and we want to win. So if you're giving us tools to do that, we're listening. To build profitable business relationships in the US, I think there's a few key things that need to be borne in mind at all times. One is out of sight is out of mind. So we need to know you're around, that you're proximate. So whether it's a video call or it's a phone call, email, we just need to know that you're still interested and you're still there, because we perceive the distances to be really great and impediments very often. So time zone differences outside of the US are often confusing. So proximity is going to be a key factor. I think another key factor that's going to win is articulating what makes your service or product unique. Why do we want to do business with you? How do we win in America by taking on your product or service or reselling it? And if it gives us an edge, we're really listening. So I think that's a second thing. And I guess a third thing is communicating in American English. And what do I mean by that? American English is a very low context language. What you hear, what we say, is what we mean. So nuances, double entendres, lots of multiple meanings, irony, we just won't understand it. And it isn't because we're not very intelligent, nothing to do with that. It's everything to do with the language. So as long as you master American English and keep it in terms that are very clear and explicit, because we're also a very explicit business culture, I think those are the key ways that people will win. In a nutshell, describing the American style of business, I would probably say informal, relaxed, friendly, open, humor is important, and interested. I think we're generally extrovert. As a nation, if I had to say what personality is the US, I would definitely say it's extrovert. So we're sociable, chatty, talkative, and I think people that work with us find that openness and friendliness and generally warmth very inviting, which is why so many people work with Americans. So I think the trick is understanding that style and mirroring it and being relaxed as well. Doesn't mean informal to the extent of sloppy, but it means there aren't a lot of strict protocols. So I think the people who you send to negotiate, or if you yourself are negotiating, being aware of that will make it an easier flow. It's just conversational and not so rigid. So I think that's probably how I describe the American style. I'm delighted to have this chance in October to be speaking at the Frankfurt Book Fair. It's a real honor to be part of the Taylor and Francis and Routledge team, and also to meet the audience and the international people. Obviously, this is the biggest book fair in the world. So to have this chance to share some insights about Americans in business and how to work with us, I think is just a really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm absolutely delighted. I think the audience at the Frankfurt Book Fair will find quite a few insights from the talk that I'll be giving. I think a couple of things will stand out. One is they'll learn the rules of the game of business in America, and my hope is they get to use those at the book fair. So to keep it relevant, many of the people that go to the Frankfurt Book Fair are obviously negotiating with US publishers. So it would be fantastic to hear that after the show and after the talk, they've been able to use some of the insights and tips for working with Americans directly in their negotiations and their communications with their counterparts at the show. But ultimately, what I want them to leave with are some insights about how we think, the rules of the game of American business, how we communicate, maybe how you influence Americans and their thinking, and ultimately how they improve the relationships that they either currently have or may have in the future so that they're profitable. And what do I mean? It's not just profitable in terms of money, it's also profitable in terms of that these relationships are happy relationships, that you actually like working with my counterparts and my countrymen, that it isn't a chore and it isn't painful, but that it's a happy, easy relationship and an exchange. And we know that the more you understand a business culture and the more you understand what drives a culture, what its values are and its beliefs and its protocols and its rules, the more you understand that, the easier it actually is to win. So I'm hoping to give some top tips when I get to meet people in Frankfurt in October. I'm really delighted to be able to give this talk about working with Americans at the Frankfurt Book Fair. So the talk is on the 17th of October, 4 p.m. Frankfurt time. It's in Hall 5.1, and it's the international stage. So I'm hoping that all of the people that are going to come along will be able to apply these ideas immediately afterwards as they walk around the show. Many people will be looking to do deals with American publishers and negotiate rights around the globe, but especially with Americans. So I'm hoping they'll get the chance to use the ideas right away. I have a number of other talks coming up in the near future. One of them is for the Financial Times Non-Executive Directors Club. That's taking place in early October. And there I'm helping board members better understand how to work on an international board, because some of the challenges of negotiating across cultures, when you have a board of directors from different parts of the world, all of them bring different assumptions about how the business works, how it shouldn't work. So hopefully I will help shed some light and give some practical advice and tools for how to navigate across these different parts of the world. Another talk I have coming up in November is a leadership program that I'm running for a major international jewelry brand, and helping their top people around the world be even better at leading other people. And another talk I have as well coming up in November is focused on working with Americans. Since our book is launching in November, I have in fact a number of commitments where I get to share these insights about ways to help people have these happier and much more profitable business relationships. I have been thinking about some possible future books. One future book may well be about working with the UK and working with the British. Now, there have been several books about the British culture, but it's the national culture that those books have covered. They haven't really covered the British business culture, and that's the thing I think would be really interesting. So that's one idea I'm toying with. I'm also toying with a book about failures. And about international business failures that are the direct result of not knowing a culture. Now, there's a couple of really good books already on the market that look at brand failure, but they don't look specifically at the cultural differences that led to a company messing up. And I think that would be a great read. So I'm contemplating both of those.